Hi, everyone. I want you all to do me a favor, just the ladies. Raise your hand if you ever felt there was something seriously wrong with you, went to the doctor, and they told you it was anxiety, or probably not a big deal after you explained all your symptoms, and you knew that was not the case. Oh, amazing.
Mom, you got 2 hands rolling there.
All right, we're going to have some fun tonight because that's exactly what this book is all about, how it's not just all in your head. But before we start, I want to give you a little bit of a sense of what this remarkable woman is about. And I noticed once that Dr. Comen was wearing a beautiful necklace in the form of a life preserver, a round one with a stripe across it like you'd see on the HMS Pinafore, Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. So I asked her what it was about, and she said one of her patients at Memorial Sloan Kettering had given it to her, saying that during cancer she felt like she was in a storm lost at sea, and Dr. Comen, as her oncologist, had been her life preserver. And I thought, wow, that really encompasses what Dr. Comen is for thousands of women who are going through their scariest and most turbulent time, and she is a life preserver, guiding them through with compassion and dedication. So now she's actually handing that life preserver over to the rest of us in the form of this book. It's a way of sifting through all of the convoluted messages about women's health and the mansplaining that our symptoms sometimes get dismissed with. So you are here to tell us that we are not crazy.
No.
That this is not all in our head. What is it that you want women to know?
First of all, Gigi, thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you to everybody who's here tonight and trekked out in the snow. I know it wasn't easy, and it means so very much to me. And, in the last few days, I've been asked that question so many times. Why did I write this book? What do I want women to know? And just looking out on the audience tonight, I'm really overwhelmed by the stories and the experiences with my patients. So I wrote this book because, yes, I'm passionate about biology and medicine, but even more so the experience of illness and the experience of illness for women and how that's inextricably tied to history, religion, and culture, and the stories that we tell ourselves. And looking out on this audience tonight, I have been privileged to hear very intimate, personal, sacred stories from patients, many of which include being dismissed by their doctor, invalidated for their pain, misdiagnosed, or perhaps not even diagnosed with what they should be diagnosed with. And I've experienced that myself. And I've been told I'm crazy. I've been told it's all in my head. I've been told myself that I'm too anxious for whatever I was feeling. And the book is about unpacking that legacy, understanding the history of where that comes from and how we move forward in a better place.
I have a story in the book, an veiled name, page 282, I think.
Hi, Stella. Hi.
Hey,
Hey,
you outed me. So
it's a good code name, right? Now that you outed yourself.
A lot of times people think that women's medicine is just sort of gynecology and breast cancer. And there's so many diseases and illnesses that are primarily focused on women that consistently go misdiagnosed. So walk us through a little bit about what they are.
Well, it's so important because when I was in medical school, I actually didn't even think I was a women's health specialist, even though I was fascinated by breast cancer. I knew I wanted to go into that. But it was kind of this almost taboo field, like who really goes into women's health? And it was assumed that that meant you were going to go into gynecology. And I almost drank this Kool-Aid that women's health was really about bikini medicine, our breast health, or our reproductive function. But in fact, we are head to toe different than men. And that's every system in our body, whether it's understanding our cardiovascular system, our circulatory system, our nervous system, our GI system. And to your point, I actually didn't know this, but 80% of autoimmune diseases are in women, but we don't consider that a women's health disease. Heart disease is the #1 killer of women, but do we think of that as a women's health disease? Or Alzheimer's is 2 times more likely to be found in women than men, and yet it is woefully underfunded, understudied, and underdiagnosed for so many women.
And women's symptoms are considered atypical for a heart attack or MS. So
yeah.
Why don't you tell us, what is it that we actually need to know?
Well, a lot. I think that, for example, when you talk about heart disease or heart attacks, when I was in medical school and to this day, when a woman presents with heart attack symptoms, they may be different. They may be jaw pain, they may be fatigue, they may be GI upset. And in medical school, I see some of my colleagues here, we learned that women's symptoms for heart attacks are atypical. Well, how are we atypical if we're greater than 50% of the population and that's the number one way that we die? That's absolutely ridiculous. The point is that we need to change the lexicon of how we refer to women's health, how we talk to women, how we listen to women, instead of imposing what we think is wrong with them, really listening first, and from there trying to figure out what's going on. When we think about autoimmune diseases, so many women present with joint pain or fatigue. The number of women I interviewed or doctors who are specialists in that field that said that these women were dismissed because, oh, you're tired because you're a new mom, or you're tired because you're working too hard. No, you're tired because you have a treatable autoimmune condition that has gone undiagnosed for years and years. So I want women to hold on to what's going on with them and make sure that they continue to advocate for their health with their doctor till they find the answers.
And I think it's really important to note that this isn't just about male doctors dismissing women's symptoms, but there's a whole history of bias that both genders are trying to decode together.
Of course, I've drank the Kool-Aid myself. This is also my own learning, my own personal therapy to how I can be a better doctor. There are stories in this book that where have to be completely honest, where I misjudged women, where I had my own bias. And I know that there are some incredible male healers in the room tonight. And the key to what I really want to say is this is not about sex and how you were born and men versus women. Men can have equally that same nurturing, comforting, empathic spirit that we associate with female healers. And concomitantly, there are many female doctors that can be dismissive of women. The point is, this whole idea of the feminine spirit of healing, that nurturing, that empathy, that taking the time to listen. We know that women doctors on average listen better, take more time with patients. There's no reason why men can't do that, and there are some men that do that beautifully. So my point is really, how do we make sure that we value these more ineffable qualities of what it means to be a healer in medicine? How do we bake back into the system all those important, critical, nurturing elements of medicine that I think have been sidelined for far too long?
So we have established that we have an imperfect health system. Empower these women here tonight. What can they take to their next doctor's visit that will make them have a better experience?
Well, so many of you came with friends tonight, or you came with family. I think first and foremost, especially when you're anxious with a new diagnosis, coming with a personal ally, coming with a friend, coming with a family member is incredibly important. When I had surgery recently, I was so nervous that I almost couldn't absorb anything the doctor that was telling me. And I remember thinking, gosh, this is what my patients must feel. How do they possibly understand anything I'm telling them, let alone about the biology of their cancer? I don't care how smart you are, you need somebody else there to be the eyes and ears of what you're going through and to ask questions. I think another really important point that I've mentioned before is don't stick it out. If you don't like your doctor or think they don't like you, they probably don't. Move on. Like, what you're picking up on is probably true. Find another doctor. I know it's kind of controversial to say, but this is not a relationship where you need to go to therapy for. Just break it, right? The other thing is with the recent Cures Act, I don't know if you're aware of this, but many of you can go on your MyChart and see your pathology results, your lab results, way before even your doctor necessarily has time to look at them. That is terrifying. It's really important that you talk to your doctor about how you want to receive information. Do you want to know about it, or do you want to have a filter in the system such that you wait for a call from the doctor or the nurse practitioner? The other thing to know is that the system of medicine is very different now. You may have a nurse practitioner on your healthcare team. Communicate with your healthcare team about how you want to receive information. How am I going to get it? Am I going to get it from the portal? Who's going to be calling me? Who can advocate for me? The other really important thing is be nice to the person that's scheduling your appointments, because that trickles back. If you're really pissed off that day and you take it out on the scheduler or the admin, we end up finding out about it, and there's kind of a little note. It's like, this one wasn't nice to us, so don't do that.
That goes with everything in life. Always be nice to the gatekeeper. So there is a history here of this sort of bias against women in medicine. Walk us through some of the key points that you highlight in your book, because you go deep in the book and it's fascinating.
Well, we go very, very far back in time, but how many women here have been called hysterical at some point in their life? Mommy, you can put both hands up. Daddy is sitting next to you. I know. Yeah. So, I'm like, we got the guy right here. I know it's happened. Yes.
I'm trying to not make eye contact with my husband.
It's okay. It's okay. We're good. All the awkwardness is over. We've gotten all the feels out, Gigi. Well, the word hysteria comes from the Greek word for womb. So going all the way back in time, the Greeks had this idea that the womb wandered everywhere, and that's this terrible organ is what made us so crazy. And then throughout history, obviously, they learned that it's actually tethered, it's not wandering, and you don't need to kind of like throw women up in the air to reposition it or give them these weird salts to move it back around. But then there's the discovery of the ovaries, and oh my God, that's what really makes us crazy. So if you're really nuts, we're going to remove them. And I know I said I'd be safe, but also the clitoris too, Gigi. I know. Gigi's my prude younger sister.
Yes.
Sorry, younger.
I'm
younger
the police.
You're the police. She's like, be careful about what you say there. Whatever. And then we discovered estrogen, and that's really what's making you nuts. But throughout history, this specter of the hysterical woman was completely woven through every aspect of medicine, whether it was the hysterical woman with the Greeks or the anxious housewife in the 1970s being dosed with, Valium, or maybe it's the postmenopausal woman that's being overprescribed antidepressants today, who could be taking a medicine for her hot flashes, who could be having intravaginal estrogen instead, who could be having hormone replacement therapy. So it's something to keep in mind when we talk about, oh, she was just hysterical about her health. And that's really woven throughout the book, through each chapter.
So that's a really prevalent topic around this hood, hormone replacement therapy. What's the latest research about the benefits and the concerns?
Well, just going back a little bit in time, the champion, this guy, Roger Wilson in the 70s, who wrote this book, he was considered, the hero for women, because he basically said that we were castrated cows when we went through menopause and we needed to give everybody hormone replacement therapy. I mean, this was the hero. I mean, literally. And then, of course, shortly thereafter, all these women were put on hormone replacement therapy, and then the pendulum swung in the other direction, where we said, "Oh my gosh, everyone's going to get breast cancer from hormone replacement therapy." Not true. And we're finally getting to this place where we can have individualized, personalized conversations with patients about what their actual symptoms are, how we can thoughtfully address them, and hormone replacement therapy may be very appropriate for some women. But the problem is we're still playing so much catch up. It's only recently that we've been able to say for some women with breast cancer that we can do potentially some forms of hormone replacement therapy, or we can do intravaginal estrogen, or that we could use it at all for the general population.
So another thing that you talk about in this book that is relevant to this crowd is the prevalent idea that if you're thin, you're healthy. And that, in fact, it's really more about muscle mass. So what does that say about the Ozempic Mounjaro craze sweeping the Upper East Side and the rest of the country?
I think we have a big problem on our hands. So, of course, there's an epidemic of obesity in this country, no doubt. And it leads to tons of horrible comorbidities like heart disease and diabetes. And for certain people, Ozempic, Mounjaro is a lifesaver, truly, because they need to lose that weight and they're truly struggling. But for the Upper East Side woman that wants to lose 5 pounds, I think we're in a really bad danger zone, because you can think you're skinny and therefore metabolically fit, and oh my gosh, you're fitting in that size too. But we know that there's this whole phenomenon of skinny fat where you can actually have a higher percentage of fat to muscle. And that's an enormous problem, because we know that muscular strength, particularly for women as they age, is critical for our flexibility, for our mobility, for our balance, for our bone density. So we have all of these women on these medications and losing muscle mass and probably aging faster than we want them to, or than they should be.
There was a good article about in the New York Times last week. Can you actually make up for it, though, in the gym?
Well, I think we shouldn't even be making up for it. We should be focusing on it. So I've been an athlete my whole life. I've been a dancer my whole life, but I never knew how to strength train until this year. And that was never part of any fitness program that I ever was a part of. Why? Because I think I also drank the Kool-Aid, which I've said more than once tonight, but I think it's true about, oh, we don't want to look bulky, and we're going to look bulky if we start lifting weights. Not true at all. First of all, it's incredibly important that we focus on strength training for women, again, for their bone density, for their health, for their longevity.
So one thing I really want to talk about, there's a poignant part in the book about the misdiagnoses of concussions and victims of domestic violence. And I want to highlight this because we want to talk about Safe Horizons tonight, which is an organization that helps those victims and is by our sponsor, Meg Driscoll of Evolve MKD, who
Thank you, Meg.
is a board member of Safe Horizons.
Raise your hand. Come on. If you're raising your hand for hysterical, raise it for the good things.
Thank you. Let's highlight what this misconception is about concussions and victims of domestic violence.
I think even more broadly about victims of domestic violence, there were so many heartbreaking stories throughout history, but that I came across just thinking, oh my God, what have women suffered from? Where are these lost voices? But even more so thinking about the lost voices of today, women that we can still help. Not these ghosts of the past, but women that are suffering in silence today. When I was in medical school and during my training, one of the things we were taught to say is, oh, are you safe at home? And that was kind of good enough to ask, right? And then you just sort of move on. What I didn't know in speaking with emergency room physicians and really talking to more doctors about this is that, listen to this, 1 in 4 women will suffer from severe physical violence at the hands of an intimate partner. Think about the things that we focus on as an epidemic in this country. That is an epidemic, severe, right? And I'm talking about strangulation, which is a gateway to murder, and I'm talking about repeated concussions and hits to the head. I spoke with many emergency room physicians that say marks from strangulation can be missed. A woman will come in with some sort of, scratch on her head for stitches, and the strangulation marks are missed. Or she seems disoriented and people start testing her for drug use or alcohol because when the police come or when she gets to the emergency room, she can't give a good story about what happened. That's because she's been hit in the head. So what are we missing here? And there is something that we can do, and I'm grateful for Safe Horizons. Meg, thank you for all of your support. But we can be there for family. We can be open-minded to the fact that this doesn't have socioeconomic boundaries. Any woman can be a victim of domestic violence in any relationship, and we need to make sure that we're supportive and thoughtful about this on all aspects of our society.
So
thank you, Meg, and thank you, Safe Horizons.
Let's take it on a lighter note.
Okay.
So one of the fascinating topics in this book is about the history of plastic surgery.
Oh.
And you would die. They all thought, the first plastic surgeons thought they were psychoanalysts and that they would take a so-called ugly woman and make her so-called beautiful, and therefore they would fix all her mental problems, right?
It's true, right?
What struck you about researching plastic surgery? Because it's a really fascinating chapter.
Well, I think there's a double-edged sword to this concept of beauty and medicine. And the history of plastic surgery has historically been men operating on women and kind of being these arbiters of what's beautiful. The history of the development of breast implants, for example, had nothing to do with breast cancer and helping women feel more themselves, but really two guys that liked big breasts and thought that this woman, Timmy Jean should have them, and when they fixed her tattoo, and knew that there would be a market for that, and knew that there was something about pathologizing women's beauty, whether it was saying they had micromastia or that their aging skin was a real pathology for them. But yet when we go to the doctor today or the dermatologist or the plastic surgeon, there's also, is there something empowering for women to feel like they can change and alter themselves and feel more empowered, or are we really more subjects of these punishing standards? And I think the first chapter of the book is really meant to be provocative, not to say we shouldn't get Botox, I'm a huge fan, or we shouldn't get whatever, alteration that we want, but really think about, why are we doing it? Are we doing it to feel empowered, or are we doing it because of some social standard that is more overwhelming to us than actually empowering?
That makes me think of the story of the patient that traveled across the country to ask you a question.
Yeah. So I had this breast cancer patient who had metastatic breast cancer. So she did not have a curable cancer, but she was doing really, really well. She was on oral therapy. She wasn't even on chemotherapy and living for years and years with it. And she came and she was kind of like very well put together, but kind of anxious. And we were going over her whole history. And I didn't know why she was there because she had been doing so well and every PET scan looked good. And so you go through everything and I said, you came all the way from Chicago. You're doing great. What am I missing here? And, you would have thought she had like this deep, dark secret. But she said, I really flew here because I think you could answer this question for me. I just want to know, can I get Botox and filler? And I'm too afraid to ask my oncologist because I'm afraid he'll think that I'm not grateful for being alive and I'm too vain for wanting these other things because at least I'm alive. And it was really heartbreaking for me. The best thing I did for that woman was refer her to a dermatologist who made her feel great and thrive and nothing else that I could do for her from an oncology perspective. But it really speaks to, again, the experience of women in illness, that we have to pay attention to all aspects of what it means to not just be surviving, but thriving. And for so much of the history of medicine for women, we have not been allowed to ask the questions that would permit us to thrive, to seek out the answers that would permit us to live our best life. And that's what I hope this book is just part of a greater mission of.
So this concept of thriving, not just surviving, that is so important to you. What advice do you have for women to maintain and increase their vitality as they get older?
Wait.
She thinks this is code for something else. I really mean vitality.
You mean is this like 18th century English and you're asking me about sex?
No. I could tell in your eyes that's what you were thinking. Absolutely not. You can actually talk about that if you want, but just in general.
So ask me the question again. I got confused.
What
I went off
advice do
here.
you have for women to thrive as they get older?
Okay, well, that's important too. So I'm going to go there. I think that if you look at the history of medicine, women's sexual desire, their libido, their sense of self, at every turn, and you can read it in my book, is something that either doctors sought to control and be the moral arbiters of, or prescribe. Whether it was for hysteria, you should have sex, but only with your husband and only when he says you should. Or, oh my gosh, you're riding a bicycle because you're going to masturbate, don't ride the bicycle. And I think that as we get older, that is something that we've forgotten about for women. Whether it's addressing hormone replacement therapy, there's no world in which we would be castrating men for cancer treatment the way that we do young women and not be addressing their sexual health concerns. And I think that is a huge part of women thriving that is left out of the history of medicine and left out of how we care for women today. In my field of oncology, we are 2 times more likely to ask a man about sexual side effects than we are a woman from chemotherapy or whatever drug she's on. That's simply unacceptable. And that is part of our vitality.
The
Cheers,
bicycle issue is a whole chapter. So buckle your seatbelt. I want to talk about, let's see, there's this whole sad part in the book, and it's not funny at all. It's like awful, just about all the shame that women have around their illnesses. Mm-hmm. And they go to her and they're apologizing for sweating during their cancer treatment, or they cover their scars with stickers because they don't want you to see it. It's just really heartbreaking that we attribute illness with something to be so ashamed of in our society. So how do you handle that, and what do you tell them?
It's interesting you bring up the sweating, because that was one of the original things that really got me to think about, well, what is this legacy that we've inherited when we go to the doctor's office? I was in an exam room I had a medical student with me, and when you have a med student, you're always a little bit more on top of things. You're like, oh, let me make sure I'm really teaching this student something. And you pay a little bit more attention. And that day, I noticed that every woman, when I went to go examine her, because they would put their arms up, every woman would apologize to me. I'm so sorry I'm sweating. And some of these women, I had just told them that they had cancer. And I'm thinking, This is completely normal. You're anxious, you're nervous, we're talking about cancer, you're sweating. Why are you apologizing? Or they'll say like, oh my gosh, I didn't shave my legs. Your doctor really is not looking and doesn't care. How many women here before they had a child or before they go to the gynecologist rushes to go get waxed before?
Pedicure.
Your doctor does not care. They're not judging you for that. They've seen it all. But yet we feel this need to kind of show up prepared and then apologize when we're not perfect in our illness. And that I've done it myself countless times. Even, you can read in the book in the conclusion, why is it that women feel so ashamed about their body? I never during residency and never during my training had a man apologize to me for sweating, not once, or being like having a hairy back or something.
Anything, really.
No man was like, I'm sorry, I'm a bear today. Like,
I feel like it would be remiss if we had a conversation about women's health at the 92nd Street Y without talking about a very serious elephant in the room, which is reproductive rights being stripped around our country. And I guess the question is, what can young women do to empower themselves in this scenario?
I think there's lots of great organizations that they can get involved in. I think there's this groundswell, particularly of younger women, about recognizing that they need to be advocates for themselves and for their sisters, and also for the mothers in the room and the fathers, to be making sure we're having open conversations about birth control, about your reproductive rights, about consent. I think it's essential. And I would say that throughout history, women's bodies have been seen as vessels. And that is our primary purpose, which is absolutely ridiculous. And you see that played out even when it came to clinical trials. It was not until 1993 that it was required that NIH-funded studies include women. And that was, or include women even of childbearing age, or pregnant women. So we don't even study women. We don't even study pregnant women. There's so much that we have to catch up on, because it's like, well, the most important thing is that they are a vessel for carrying a child.
So I know you majored in the history of medicine at Harvard, of course, and Harvard Med School. And you have done so much research on this topic, and it's in the book. What are some of the more interesting things to you when you were uncovering all of these details?
How much I didn't know. How much I didn't know. I'm thinking, I take care of thousands and thousands of women. I've spent decades reading about the history of medicine, and yet how much I didn't know. Even the history of irritable bowel syndrome, what doctors said about women suffering. It's just extraordinary to me, head to toe, that I could be completely immersed in caring for women, and I could be, as dumb as they come about women's health. And that's simply unacceptable. So I'm hoping we can move the needle to a more equitable future.
What are some of the things that you researched in history that surprised you? A lot of things, I'm sure.
A lot of things. You want me to pick some?
I found the book very surprising.
What were you most surprised by?
Putting
you on the spot, Gigi.
I have, some of it was really
the bike.
prurient.
You're really into the bike. You're going to get on the Peloton when you go home.
There are museums filled with artifacts of women's health that I thought were really disturbing as well.
Yes.
And just the history of the lobotomy, for example, and women being associated with mental illness, and there's sort of everything going through them obeying or disobeying their husbands.
We have to behave.
Committing, yes.
I think one of the things that was surprising to me was also thinking about my own medical school training and what I missed. So anatomy is a super important part of our training, and the imagery of how we look at women becomes incredibly important from head to toe. And when you look at anatomical textbooks, including to this day, a lot of times you'll see the male skeleton or the male circulatory system or each of the organ systems presented on a male figure. And that's really subtle messaging or not so subtle messaging, that the man is the kind of the ideal reference, and then you view the woman only for reproductive organs, the breast or the uterus. And there is this throughout history, subtle messaging and not so subtle, that women are the imperfect version of a man. Even going back to the Greeks, where it's men have all their genitalia outside and women are inside, tucked inside, the imperfect version of that. There was a famous Dr. Galen who referred to us as blind with like moles, and that's why everything's tucked inside. Yeah, I know, I digress.
It's good stuff. What do you want to see in the future for the medical establishment?
I mean, there's so much that's wrong with it. We know that, and I certainly cannot fix that. The broader ecosystem of third-party players, insurance companies that completely get in the way of the doctor-patient relationship, and we're pushed into these 15-minute appointments and focusing on an electronic medical record that puts us in front of the computer and clicking away and coding. All of that I cannot fix in one book. But what I hope to do and spark your health or spark of movement is that these other aspects of healing that women are historically seen as better at than men can be infused back into our healthcare system, can be valued. When you look at who goes into what specialties, why are there more men going into surgical fields and women going into more fields that have continuity of care that are then underpaid and undervalued, like palliative care? If you sit and hold a dying patient's hand for hours, there's no value for that in our medical school system. But if you quickly fix a broken arm, well, you've saved a life or you've saved a finger. I think that really, really needs to change in our healthcare system, what we value, and that we historically think about that as a feminine spirit. But that's something that we all can do. And I know that there are some people that do that already.
And you. I think it's a good time to go to our audience questions. I want to warn you that the people at the 92nd Street Y are really well informed on the research and
Let's go.
Really tough questions. So bring your A game. Let's see if anyone.
I ever brought anything else?
Would you like to ask a question?
I have a question for you.
Hi.
My name's Annalise. I have a question. How do you think there's an association between the 80% of the population that have autoimmune disease related to the fact that women have to be nice ladies all the time?
Interesting. Okay, so the question is, I'm supposed to repeat the questions for the people who are watching on the web. Do you think there is a relationship between this prevalence of autoimmune diseases and women?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think there's. I don't think right. I don't think if you're asking, I don't think it's a suppression or trauma that's necessarily causing these autoimmune diseases. I think that there are biological reasons for it. In fact, there was a recent study that is showing a certain marker on the X chromosome, of which we have 2, that links us more to having autoimmune diseases. I think there are certain diseases that are more prevalent in men that we know about because historically men cared about them more because they affected them more. So I don't think that there's a emotional component or an apologizing component that therefore leads to illness. But I do think that they're woefully underdiagnosed, and we get just kind of packaged as joint aches, fatigue, something else hormonal, and brushed to the side.
What if keeping it all in leads to stress, and stress exacerbates illness?
I think stress is not good for any of us. But on the other hand, look at my field. I know lots of vegan, Costa Rica living, filtered water, meditating, amazing, seemingly not stressed out women who get cancer, right? So at the end of the day, much of illness is not within our control. But with what is within our control is to better the system so that when people do get sick, we actually take care of them as opposed to brush their symptoms aside. But there's a lot of blaming that goes into, she was so stressed out, that's why that happened to her. Or she went through that time in her life. That's why she got, this autoimmune disease or cancer. I don't think that narrative does us any good. And I think it just recycles that old story of, well, she did it to herself.
I think that's a really helpful point. Any other questions? Yes.
I'm just curious. You talk about how we're behind and better in the system. In any of your research, did you find that the entire world is behind all cultures, or is it more focused and behind here in the States?
Oh, that's interesting.
It's
Is it more U.S. focused in your research that we're behind, or is it global?
So a lot of the work that I did, I really wanted to make this more global, and I actually had some undergraduate students that were from different backgrounds and countries that really gave me a lot of insight. the book is really based on the founding of American medicine, which has its footprint in European medicine. But absolutely, I think that there are different cultural narratives that become really, really important. When you look at the Middle East and how women are cared for there, or differently in Africa or South America, again, the idea that medicine does not exist in a vacuum, but is inextricably linked to culture and religion and the society that we live in. So again, much of the book is based on American medicine, but I think these themes are throughout history and throughout the world.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
What, and it's a big one, what role do insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies, not pointing out
We have to
any
separate them because some are
specifics,
here tonight.
not any specifics,
Okay.
but what role do you think that they play in some of the misunderstandings about health?
Okay, let's talk about insurance companies. So, one of the huge problems that we have is obviously overspending in this country and how we spend on healthcare. But insurance companies can be a nightmare for both the patients and the doctor, and it's become this runaway train that's gotten in the way of actually caring for patients. No one wants to wait for their doctor, but we're also not eating bonbons on the other side of the curtain. The amount of time that we have to spend, or someone on our healthcare team has to spend with prior authorizations to simply get the basic care that you need for something that's FDA approved or we know help you is ridiculous. There are studies that show it's hours and hours of people on a healthcare team that are doing that. When it comes to pharmaceutical companies, I think what we really have to do is push companies and push those people that are doing clinical trials to really be asking the right questions. And one of the things that I learned about in doing a recent panel for newer drugs for irritable bowel syndrome is that the way that they found better care for patients was by really pulling in the patients themselves and saying, what are your symptoms? You tell us what you're feeling, as opposed to us try to come up with a study way before we're actually asking the women what they're feeling.
Diplomatic. Hi, how are you?
Hi. Hi.
Thank you so much for sharing this information. It's been really sad, actually, to hear about some of the lack of believability that women get from doctors.
Mhm.
I've read some articles, and I'm curious to hear your perspective and thoughts and your research and kind of your
Mhm.
experience, and how whether there's a disparity amongst women based on race, socioeconomic status, religion, and kind of how to combat that.
1,000,000,000 exponential on steroid percent. So one of the things that's woven throughout my book is the misogyny and racism go hand in hand. And throughout history, sadly, especially when you talk about the fields of gynecology, I mean, it's absolutely heartbreaking whether it was women being black slaves being experimented on, literally. I mean, it's truly heartbreaking. And again, that's woven throughout the book, or the assumptions that black women don't experience pain or that they have thicker skin. It's absolutely horrible, but it plays out today. So it's not just racism, but it's socioeconomic status. When you look, for example, at certain minorities and breast cancer, black women are 40% more likely to die from breast cancer than any other ethnicity. And that's not because of incidence or the type of cancer that they're getting. It's access to quality care. So throughout history and to this day, we know that there are ongoing inequities that are further compounded by not being a white upper class woman. So thank you for that question. Yeah. There's one there, one there.
Okay, you go ahead. I have to repeat it, though.
So, just in an effort to be a better self-advocate, in terms of normal, everyday medical maintenance, whether it's our annual OB appointment or the once every 5-year GP appointment, if you can get one, what questions would you recommend that a woman be asking and interrogating in the very few times we have with the doctor, just in terms of everyday medical updates?
The question is, if a woman wants to be a better self-advocate, what are the questions she should be asking in the few minutes she has with her doctor?
Yeah, I think a lot of women have that one thing that they're just too embarrassed to ask. And I think if you can get yourself to a place where saying, I'm just not going to apologize about this, and I know I sound crazy, but just get that narrative out of your head. And if you have that time with a doctor that you trust, say, I'm really worried about this right? Because your doctor's going to come in, if they're good, with, the checklist of you need a mammogram at this age, a colonoscopy at this age, a pap smear, and let's do an EKG, and sort of those checklists. But the self-advocacy will come from really honoring what you care about, what you're worried about, and having that reassurance when you go to bed at night that your medical concerns have been addressed. So if something's really bothering you, don't be afraid to ask about it.
My question was similar to that, so I'm going to jump off of it in terms of if you're trying to advocate for yourself, you're not getting care, someone's not taking you seriously. You talked about how changing, whoever's the doctor, also coming with another person. Is there any other things that we can do as strategies to kind of get the help we need if we feel like we keep hitting a roadblock?
What other strategies can women use if they're hitting roadblocks to advocate for themselves when they feel that the doctor's visits are not going their way?
I mean, we talked about bringing somebody with you, talked about coming with questions. I think the biggest thing is if you just keep hitting that roadblock, you have to find another doctor. And I think what's really hard about our healthcare system today is some fields are just so woefully unavailable. If you need a neurologist, good luck, right? You're going to have to pay out of pocket to find somebody who can see you, within a year's time. And I think that's just one of the biggest problems. I'm trying to be optimistic, but I recognize the challenge there. I think the key is finding someone that you really trust, because if you constantly feel like you're just going to hit that roadblock and you're fighting to get the attention that you need, it's never going to be a good relationship. And outsourcing from your friends, who have you seen? Do you have a recommendation? Or if you need to see a specialist, asking your primary care doctor who they recommend. And if you're having a hard time getting in, asking that doctor to put in a good word for you.
How about just finding a good female primary care in New York?
Everyone
Super hard. Doesn't have to be a woman. It could be a very nice man too. Give the men a chance.
Yes. Dr. Charlton.
Okay, so question number one, you were talking about how when you were in medical school, how people were teaching or talking about women's health.
Mm-hmm.
So first, have you seen that? Is it changing today? And number two is, when are you going to turn this into a curriculum for the medical school?
Ooh, good question. Are things changing, and are you going to turn any of this information into a curriculum for medical schools?
So obviously I work at a big institution, name unsaid, although someone already said it. I think when it comes to changing the system, I think it's actually really hard in these old, storied, hallowed institutions. But what's been really amazing is social media. So we malign social media, but it has been the amazing equalizer for female physicians. I have met so many incredible women who are advocating for women's health online. And I think that there is this groundswell of women that just really want to see things changing, and they are, and I do think it's getting better. But I don't think it's necessarily going to happen by banging our heads against some of these old institution. It's going to come from women thinking outside of the box, men being allies along the way, of which there are many. And I think that a lot is changing because of that, because women are less afraid to say, this is not working anymore. In terms of a curriculum, I would be honored. Yeah. A couple institutions have asked me to come speak, and my alma mater, so I'm a little excited about that. Yeah. Let's hope.
JP Morgan Healthcare Conference?
I know. I didn't tell that about me, Mommy. I'll tell you later. I know. I'll tell you.
Yes. So these are, let's ask another question. Yes, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Oh, I was going to say, you know what? Make a list of the doctors the female doctors that you like on social media.
I will.
And put it and post it for all.
I will. There's some great ones. There's some great ones out there. I love that idea. Chock full of good ideas.
You don't want it.
Hi. Okay.
So, as we know, survivorship is a means of reaffirming the things you can do to help yourself and reduce your risk and rethink towards your life that you had before, and also taking symptoms seriously and the ability to be mixed, because some things are not all in your head, but then it's also hard to know.
Mm.
So what are your best ways of framing that for yourself and for your patients, and that
So what do you take seriously and what do you let move on when it comes to all of the difficult messages around cancer survivorship?
It's such an excellent question. And I think one of the things that really drew me to oncology is that it throws into high relief our mortality, that we all sit here with that knowledge. But when you have a cancer diagnosis, it's sort of thrown into your head, okay, something horrible has happened to me and something worse could even happen. And I think what makes the job and these conversations so sacred with patients is because we all have to live with that fear. And yet being in the doctor's office and having a cancer diagnosis really brings that into your home in a way that none of us want to hear. And I think the journey for cancer patients is that balance of how do you wrestle with the anxiety of what does tomorrow bring? How do we help you thrive? How do we help you live your best day? What does a good day look like for you? And in terms of the specifics of the anxiety that you're talking about, it's really hard, right? Because every little pain is like, oh my God, does that mean the cancer's back? Or does that mean something's worse? And I think you have, yeah, you can't. So I think you have to really work with your doctor to come up with these very specific boundaries. Like if I have a pain and it's been going on for 2 weeks and it's getting worse and it's not getting better, I have to call my doctor. If it's been 24 hours and I took some Aleve and it got better and it's coming and going, it's probably fine. And so coming up with sort of some boundaries of where you go in your mind, I think helps frame and ground the anxiety that anybody would have in that sort of situation.
It's a really good question.
You had in the blue, you had a question. You raised your hand. I'm calling you out. I'm here for you. What you got?
It was not a serious question. I was wondering, you mentioned Ozempic, and I look around at people that I've known for years, and they just look like different human beings. And I was just wondering, and even my daughter the other day said, "Oh, there's a shot that you put in your fat and it goes away." She must have taken a taxi or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just wondering, where's the disconnect between this is being advertised all over New York City, and you have people that you said just looking totally different and not healthy, to the doctor thinks that it's okay to give this to their patients, or will it be something that in a year we're going to take it off the shelf and it wouldn't cause all this harm?
I think that's an excellent question, and it really shows how, on the one hand, we have all this messaging to girls and women. It's important that you be strong and not small, and the BMI doesn't matter. It's, and you have all these Instagram influencers talking about lifting weights and all the protein that they're having. And yet, is this any different than the heroin chic? Is it any different than the tuberculosis patient that we romanticized as frail and pale and coughing up blood while she died? I don't think it's any different. So where have we gone wrong in the history? Where are we still going wrong in the messaging that we give girls? And then what are we doing to ourselves as women? I think it really, really needs to stop. And as much as we can focus on truly being healthy and not chasing these punishing beauty standards, the better that we'll feel. And honestly, if you really care about living a longer life, it's through exercise and diet. You're not going to get there through Ozempic unless you're truly morbidly obese, which these women are not.
Yeah, in the book it talks about how women with tuberculosis were considered so beautiful when they were dying because they had that pale skin and a little rosy,
so frail,
look in their cheek. Yeah,
breathless, so gorgeous.
Psycho. Yes.
Kind of piggybacks off of that. What women's health issues in your research do you find that are still massively misdiagnosed?
That's a good question. What women's health issues are still being massively misdiagnosed?
I think there are a lot of neurologic conditions like multiple sclerosis that are being missed, autoimmune conditions that are being missed. I think that there's a lot of women suffering with gastrointestinal issues that are being missed. One other thing is a lot of times we call these disorders that women suffer from as really vague, like ovarian cancer is the silent killer. It's not silent. Women are experiencing pain, bloating, abdominal discomfort. We just haven't listened to them enough, but yet we accept that these symptoms are somehow silent till they get so sick and something horrible happens to them. So I think it's really about listening to all these different areas of medicine where we assume it's vague or silent or difficult or they're a difficult patient. I don't think there's difficult patients. I think that we just don't know what we're talking about all the time.
And not to blame the patient, but women tend to focus on, not to generalize, other people and sometimes ignore their own symptoms and think, I'm
course.
fine, I'm fine, I'm fine.
Of course, but we've also been told to do that. We are the caregivers of society. We are the caregivers of our family. We are the number of women that told me that they are the mom consult for their specialty. Even this trauma surgeon, that is the most hard-charging woman I've ever met, she said, they refer to me as the mom consult. The guy who's the reckless, drunk, who got in a motorcycle accident, they send to me because they think that I'm going to be nicer and give him more counseling. I don't want to talk to that guy. But yet, the assumption is in every field that women will spend more time. And I think when it comes to apologizing for our health, apologizing for sickness, we're never going to miss the flu vaccine for our kids or a dental appointment or making sure your mom gets to their appointment, but you'll miss your own mammogram. I hear that all the time from patients.
Yes.
Hi. Have I been a Debbie Downer? Okay.
Great question. So in your research, where are you seeing the most progress being made for women?
I think with respect to, there's a lot of movement in understanding our hormone health and not just kind of dismissing particularly menopausal women or how medications may affect women's hormonal health. I think I talked about heart disease being the number one killer of women, but people are talking about that, talking about how we need to visualize women's hearts different, that we need to understand when we do an EKG that it may fluctuate with a woman's menstrual cycle. I think as much as I talk about the damage that's been done, there's a lot that's being done to move forward head to toe. I think there are some extraordinary women and men making progress in fields across the board.
Yes, go ahead.
Out yourself. Who are you? But you're in clinic with me. Well,
How
you're
can
a
men be
love.
better advocates?
You're a love,
For the
and I
women in
am
your
going to
life.
out you because I know that you are. I see day in and day out what you do for your own mom, and it's extraordinary. So I think if you can share with your friends, don't have to share here, but just what an extraordinary man you are in showing up. You fly down for appointments, you follow up, you call your mom every day, you touch base with me. It's extraordinary. And you are really such a beautiful example of that it doesn't matter who or how you were born, that we're all capable of nurturing and empathy and showing up for our family and showing up for the women in our life. So I salute you.
You got me first. I thought I was going to make you cry. Yes.
You weave in beautifully a lot about mental health. What are your thoughts about health anxiety and what can doctors do with patients who present with health anxiety?
Such a good
To repeat the question, what can you do to patients who present, what can doctors do to patients who present with health anxiety in regards to mental health?
Yeah, I think it's mental health, but it's all wrapped up in all of our health because I think because we've been so misunderstood, because we've been invalidated for our pain, because we've been told it's all in her head, that there needs to be a reshaping of how we talk to patients. And a lot of times when they're in those situations, I say, you don't have to apologize. I understand why you're anxious. Let's work through this. How can we ground it? What are you most afraid of? And when you really tackle what you're most afraid of, I think it helps provide some foundational care to really feeling understood and moving forward.
Okay, this is our last question. So before we wrap, who wants to take us to the end? Yes.
I have a question, but I also just have to start by thank you for taking the time to write this book and highlighting such an important issue. So just on behalf of the women and men,
Thank you. Mm-hmm. 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 Mm-hmm.
Is there progress with research?
There is. So, I was recently at this JP Morgan healthcare conference. It's the largest healthcare conference in the world where all these deals were made. The year before, there was nothing for women's health. And then we started this amazing conference, me and she's probably watching, one of my best friends from childhood. And the Women's White House Research Initiative showed up. And they initially gave us a room in a basement for 90 people. There were 400 people on the wait list who wanted to be there and show up. And that really speaks to the fact that we are recognizing that it's not investing in women's health and investing in women's research is not just the right thing to do, but it's actually really good for our economy, right? You'll have more work productivity. Our society will do better financially. But I think that there is so much more being done to show that there is value in that. But there are some issues along the way. So the White House Women's Health Research Initiative is an amazing initiative, but they have no money, right? So we have to push these women's startup companies. We have to push philanthropy. We have to push private equity to show that there is value in this investment, that it's not some banner that we're hanging up to say that we're doing a good job, that we actually walk the walk, and walking the walk is with people's wallets.
Well, thank you all for coming. And Dr. Comen is going to be signing her book here. So if you want to get a copy, this is a great time. You can meet her. Thank you.
Thank you.